Obviously no painting today, but you're gonna have to deal with that because I got guests here, and it means that my office becomes our extra bedroom. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Glacial Geek Deep Thoughts Thin Coats with me, Phil, the Glacial Geek. Today I am coming to you from Savannah, Georgia, but I don't have access to my office to do any thin coats today. It means that you'll have to deal with just me talking. So hopefully that won't be too bad. Yeah, my parents are down for the week, so they get to stay in my office while they're here. So no access for the thin coats this week, but I am going to drop some deep thoughts on you anyway. So here we go. Today's topic that we're going to be talking about today is Genestealer Cult and how to handle them both as a player and also as an opponent of the Genestealer Cult. So the key aspect, whenever you look at Genestealer Cult, there's one thing that obviously stands out for them amongst anything else out there right now, and that's Cult Ambush. And Cult Ambush is going to be the key component to how to play as and also how to handle the Genestealer Cult. So if you see them across the table from you, or if you are running them, that's going to be the key component that separates you from running anything else. So the difference between a neophyte and a guardsman is minimal. The difference between a pure straight Genestealer and just a Genestealer and a Tyranid army is minimal. The difference between a patriarch and a broodlord is minimal. All of these things are there's very little difference to what you can do with the Genestealer Cult versus what you can do with them outside. You know, a cult Leman Russ is just a Leman Russ. A cult Armored Sentinel is just Armored Sentinel. There are some unique models that you have access to that I'll be talking about, but the key aspect is going to be Cult Ambush and how you either handle it or how you play with it. So I'm going to come to you first as a player of the Genestealer Cult, since that's what I know better than anything else, and it'll be from there we can progress to how to handle them as an opponent. So as a player, you're gonna want to take advantage of Cult Ambush because that's going to be your strongest aspect. You know, beyond whether or not you decide that you're going to split them up between, bring in some extra detachments of Astra Militarum to get some access to some of the bigger guns, or if you want to bring in Tyranids to get access to some of those big scary monsters, big bugs. That's beside the point. That just comes down to what your personal taste is going to be and when you're running the Genestealer Cult. When you run the Genestealer Cult, though, whether it is as kind of an extra detachment really in your army, so if you're really mainly running NIDs, but you have this detachment of Genestealer Cult, or if you're running Astra Militarum, but you have this detachment of Genestealer Cult, the Cult Ambush is going to be what you're going to want to talk about. So Cult Ambush, for those of you who don't know what it is essentially a way for almost the entire army, anything that's not a vehicle essentially, to start in reserves in your army. So that innately right there, that's something that separates you from most other armies, is that you can start almost anything in reserves if you wanted to. As a Space Marine player, you're looking at either using drop pods to get people in from reserves, you're looking at Terminator armor to get them in for reserves, or jump packs. That's or some other special ones, grav shoots on Reavers, something like that. So there's a very small portion of your army that can start in reserves. As a Genestealer Cult army, if you're running pure Genestealer Cult, anything that's not a vehicle can start in reserves. So whether neophytes, aberrants, acolytes, any of the HQs, any of the Genestealers, anything, all of those can start in reserves. But when they arrive, they don't just arrive with the standard method that pretty much everyone else uses, which is 9 inches away. What you do is you roll on a chart. So you don't have as much control necessarily at the outset, but it comes with certain benefits. So when you roll this d6, if you roll a 1 for the option, it means that your opponent chooses 2 table edges, any 2 table edges on the board, and you roll off 1, 2, 3 for one edge, 4, 5, 6 on the other edge. You have to start within 6 inches of that table edge and more than 9 inches away from an enemy unit, or enemy models. So obviously 1 being the worst option, your opponent now is controlling where you're coming in from the table. It's not fun. And usually if it comes up, you're going to want to spend a command point to re-roll that 1 or have some other option in mind what you're thinking about using. We can get into that later on. 2 is essentially the same mechanics, except you, as the controlling player, choose the 2 table edges as opposed to your opponent. 3 is more than 12 inches away from an enemy, anywhere on the board more than 12 inches away from enemy models, or 9 inches away if they can't, if no one can draw a line of sight to you. So if you're inside of a building, no one can see you, you can be 9 inches, more than 9 inches away from your opponent. But if anyone can draw a line of sight to you, you need to be more than 12 inches away, which isn't great for a lot of the assaulty options. So the first 3 options are usually the toughest to really utilize when it comes to the assaulty portion of the army, which is honestly the strongest portion of your army as a Genestealer Cult player. Number 4, if you roll a 4, you start with general deep strike, so it's just more than 9 inches away from enemy models anywhere. On a 5, things start to get interesting. On a 5, you set them up more than 9 inches away from the enemy models, but then you have an option. You can either shoot with all their weapons as though it's the shooting phase. If you drop in, say, a neophyte squad with a bunch of heavy weapons or a bunch of grenade launchers or whatever else it is, they drop more than 9 inches away, and now they can shoot all of those weapons. It's a really great option for clearing away screens. It's a really great option for hitting smaller units that your opponent has trying to hold an objective. It's a great option for that kind of clearing out chaff, because a lot of your units that can deep strike, which you're talking about, basically you're talking about the ones that can shoot are basically your neophytes and your acolytes. Some of the HQs have shooting weapons, but nothing of note that you're going to really want to take advantage of it from there. But they can, those guys are really good. They've got a lot of las cannons, las guns, not las cannons. They got a lot of las guns that they can utilize. They've got some cool heavy weapons that they can utilize, especially at short range at 9 inches like that they can really take advantage of, and you can use it to clear away some pretty decent units. You know, you're not going to clear away an entire Terminator squad. You're not going to clear away like a 10-man intercessor squad, but you are probably going to take out, you know, if you shoot them into a 10-man guard unit, sure, throw them into shoot them into some conscripts, yeah, they're going to go away. Maybe even a 5-man scout squad would have trouble with that, dropping 9 inches away, we know, and just getting wailed on. So you have that option. The other option that you could do at number 5 is that they can move D6 inches, which is perfect for your assaulty units. So your acolyte, your acolyte hybrids, your aberrants, or your pure strains. What you do is you roll a d6, and now you move that much inches closer. So you've got the 9-inch charge that you start with, essentially minus d6. So you can have upwards of, you could have a 3-inch charge out of deep strike coming in there, which is beautiful. And number 6 is the best option for your assaulting forces, which is essentially most of what you're going to be doing here. On number 6, you get to move as though your regular movement. So all of a sudden now you drop more than 9 inches away, and your pure strain Genestealers can move 8 inches. They can advance. So you now move them 8 inches plus d6 inches, 14 inches now out of deep strike. So even if your opponent has set up bubbles around a lot of his things, if they're not locked down tight, you know, it's really hard to keep 14 inches moving around, switting through his chaff and getting behind there and getting off some, getting yourself in position to get some really decent charges. And getting a lot of multiple charges, which is great, because you can lock down an army with a big squad of Genestealers. With that movement, you can lock down an entire army. I have a battle report up there. If you look, when I fought up against a bunch of, there's a bunch of Primaris and Dreadnoughts, and the first turn, my Genestealer, my Pure Strains, locked down like his entire army. Just got right up in there, kept him from being able to operate, which is great, which is what you want to do as a Genestealer. Because if you, as a Genestealer Cult player, because if you're getting shot at, you're gonna go down quick. Your guys are not designed to stand up against shooting. They tend to fall apart really quick when you've got that kind of thing going on. So that's the Cult ambush, and that's the big defining difference for what your army has that no one else has. And that's what makes the Genestealer Cult unique, and that's what makes them, even as an index army, an effective army, and they do well. You know, I've had some pretty decent success with Genestealer Cult as pure Genestealer Cult, because I just run a pure Genestealer Cult, running Genestealer Cult in this edition because of that Cult ambush. And if my dice are hot during Cult ambush and I roll a bunch of 6s, a bunch of 5s for the units that I want to get into combat, they're going to do well. So to help enhance that, they've actually given us some some stratagems in chapter approved, which really help us to take full advantage of that. Honestly, the other things that they have, that like the warlord trait, I don't tend to use. I use the relic. It's a banner relic that's pretty nice, +1 to attack, I think +1 to attacks or something, whatever it is. It's pretty decent, but nothing to write home about. So if I'm running an Acolyte Icon Ward, I'll throw it on there just because who cares, it's fine. But nothing to write home about. The thing to write home about is the 2 strategies that we got. One of them is for 1 CP, you can roll an extra dice when you are when you're choosing to roll in with Cult Ambush. So for an extra CP now you're rolling 2 dice and you get to choose whichever one you want out of that option. So it gives you twice as much chance to get that 5 or 6 that you need. But if you're running them with a Primus, you actually get to roll 3d6, which is incredible because the Primus also has an additional trait that lets him re-roll his Cult Ambush options. So all of a sudden now you have a Primus running in there with, because the characters can actually come in with another infantry unit from Cult Ambush. So you can run in the Primus with a squad of Pure Strains. You run the Primus in, as I like to do it, with a squad of Aberrants. And suddenly now he's rolling 3d6 to choose what they're going to do together. And then if you roll, say you roll all 1s, you roll triple 1s, he has the ability to re-roll for free, re-roll all of them. But you have to roll all of them because it gives him a re-roll to the Cult Ambush trait, which means that you have to roll all of them. Or if you've got, like, say a 1, a 5, and a 3, and you don't much want to do the 5, you're really gunning for that 6, you really want this unit to be able to move in there, you can spend the command point to re-roll 1 of those dice and still have that 5 to fall back on, which is nice. Or you can use his full re-roll to get a better result and save that CP that you can use to re-roll for another squad that's going to be coming in and using that. Because getting good rolls, getting good options from Cult Ambush is how you do well with Genestealer Cult. Honestly, every time that I've done well, that I've had good luck with my Cult Ambush rolls, I've won. Every one that I've had bad luck with them, I've lost. Because if you can get in there, if you can get up in your enemy's face turn 1 and just hit them with those strong assault, because we have very strong assaulting forces. If you can do that, you're going to be golden. You're going to be able to really neutralize your opponent's army. You're really going to put yourself in a position where you're going to be in a strong place for the rest of the game. So even if they manage to fight back against you and take them down, they're severely weakened and their whole game plan has been disrupted because they've had to spend all this time focusing on taking care of your assaulting army, and then the rest of your army that started on the board can start moving up. Because you still have to start half your army on the board, which we have some decent options to do so, but the main thrust of what's going to make you different, that changes the reason why you would run Genestealer Cult as opposed to Tyranids, or why you would run Genestealer Cult as opposed to Astra Militarum, is that there are the units that can take full advantage of the Cult Ambush. So your Pure Strains are great for that. Aberrants are great for that. I like running. I like running the Patriarch with the Pure Strain Genestealers. I like running the Primus with my Aberrants because that's just the way it usually pans out. A lot of people like just to run a bunch of Primuses because you got the option with the more dice and the re-rolling of the dice options to run in with a bunch of Genestealers, which is great. I mean, it's a wonderful option. Wonderful option to have, wonderful option to take advantage of. I like to use the Patriarch because he's a beast, and when he gets into combat, and having 15 Pure Strain Genestealers there to help protect him means that he's going to eventually, usually he's going to get in there before he gets shot off the board by your opponent. So yeah, as a player, you need to be able to be careful about getting shot off the board, honestly. If your Genestealers don't make those charges, if they get stuck out in the open, away from things that they can get locked in combat with, I mean, they're only tough 4, so most shooting is going to start hurting them, and they've only got a 5-up invul save, you know? So they're going to go down pretty quick if they start getting shot at. And as they start to go down, they start to lose their effectiveness, because if they've got 10 or more models in their squad, they've got an extra attack, which makes a big difference. They start, you know, even if you start losing, even if you have 15 in there and you lose 1 guy there, you're losing 4 attacks, 5 attacks if you get off one of the psychic powers that I'll get into. So they start to go down if you don't get them into combat. So getting them into combat, locking them in combat, trying to string along different combats becomes key to keeping them alive and keeping your options better. Because if you have a squad of Genestealers running around your opponent's backyard, running around throughout their army, they're going to focus on those Genestealers, which has two things, benefits. One is that you've now disrupted their game plan. They have to focus on what you've done. You've taken the initiative. And two, it leaves the rest of your army alive to do what they're supposed to do. We do have some units that are good at fire support. Cult Leman Russes are great. I like to throw them in there with a bunch of heavy flamers and a battle cannon because they can keep moving up half and half and half. So even as your opponent starts taking off wounds and they start degrading in their ability to shoot, I mean, heavy flamers don't care what your ballistic skill is, you know. Then you can start to run them up there, and as you start to get less and less, shoot them up there, shoot some heavy flamers. Your opponent can't charge them, so as you just keep lugging your way up the board, they're still going to be super effective. I like Armored Sentinel. I've got 8 Armored Sentinel. I've got more that I need to build. I prefer them over the Scout Sentinels because Scout Sentinels are great because you've got that Scout move that you can do, but honestly, that Scout move is only as effective, is not super effective because they're weak. They die pretty quickly, and they die to small arms fire, if I'm being honest. I think they end up being like tough 4 or something like that, and not a whole lot of staying power as a Scout Sentinel. And the weapons that you can put on them, I prefer to put the ones on the Armored Sentinel because they can stick around better. They're better at shooting. They're better. They're a better option in my opinion. And the Armored Sentinels are great because they're seemingly not worth messing with. You know, if you just stick them in your back line with a las cannon on them, you know, las cannons are scary, but there's one las cannon, and it's just one Armored Sentinel versus a squad of 15 pure strains or a patriarch up in your grill. They're not going to draw the aggro, and that means that they're going to stick around longer, you know. And I've got really bad luck when I roll with them, but imagine if you roll statistically with them, you know, half the time you're hitting with those las cannons, and those are going to do some work, you know, because one of the things that we suffered from a bit is strong, long-range fire, you know, which is why a lot of people like to ally in Astra Militarum, because you can do that with the Brood Brothers, is you can take, for every detachment of Genestealer Cult, you can take in a detachment of Astra Militarum. So a lot of people like to ally in Astra Militarum to bulk up their long-range shooting. So bringing in some, you know, Manticores or Basilisks, or even just some of the other options for Leman Russes that you can bring in through the Astra Militarum that you don't get access to as a Genestealer Cult. Because Genestealer Cult has access to your basic Leman Russ is essentially what it has. So you've got the Vanquisher cannon you can choose the I think the twin auto cannons, the battle cannon, your basic options for a Leman Russ, versus you don't get access to the Punisher, you don't have access to the Executioner, none of those. So a lot of people like to ally in Astra Militarum to get access to those because honestly the thing that they're weakest at is long range fire. But if you can get off some really strong, if you can bust out some really strong assaults, those weaknesses in long range fire become less exaggerated, because I mean a horde, a 15-man squad or 20-man squad even of pure strains can take down a land raider. You know, honestly, you're hitting in there, wounding on even if you're wounding on 6s, which actually if you have the power Might from Beyond, it gives them +1 strength, +1 attack that you can price on them. So suddenly now they've got 5 attacks each. You know, hitting on 2s if the Patriarch is around there, wounding on 5s onto a Land Raider or a Leman Russ. On 6s it's AP -3 or 4, and you know they'll go down to that. There's just so many attacks that you're getting off there because a 20-man squad with Might from Beyond has 100 attacks. 100 attacks hitting on 2s. So you've got, you know, you're looking at what, like 60 or something. Yeah, you're looking at no, you're looking at a bajillion hits. It's something up there like 80 hits, maybe something like that. Maybe a little bit more than, yeah, I think a little bit more than 80 hits. Yeah, that's 1 in 5 as opposed to 1 in 6 that you're missing. So you're looking at a little over 80 hits. Wounding on 5s and 6s, at that point, you know, you're doing a lot of damage. You're doing a lot of damage. And you have the Patriarch that's coming up there, and he's got strength ×2 with his monster. Oh no, it's strength user versus strength 6 rending claws that reroll wounds, doing D3 damage on a 6 is doing 3 damage at AP -6. Hell yeah, it's incredible how much damage that these guys can do if they get locked in combat. But in order to get locked in combat, you need to have some good luck with the cult ambush, and you need to have a solid base of units that can harass the opponent from a distance in order to make it effective. So the other half of the army, because the first half of the army is going to be the ones that you want to use cult ambush with. So I like going with a magus because he can throw in mass hypnosis, which means that an opponent can't overwatch you. So suddenly now those flamers that your opponent has that he was expecting to use on your guys, you put mass hypnosis and now they can't even overwatch, and now you're locked in combat with a bunch of Genestealers. I've done that against Death Watch with frag cannons that he was expecting to use against my pure strains. I've used that against a squad of aggressors who had the flamer options, and my opponent was like, that was my whole plan, was to just wait for you to come at me and overwatch you, and now I can't even do that. And it becomes super effective, and it's, and it's really good because once you get locked in there, I mean, especially Marines are going to go down real hard to Genestealer Cult. I mean, no one else has the ability to really handle pure strain Genestealers up in your grill in combat, in close combat. I think they're by far they're the single best close combat infantry unit out there, if I'm being honest. They're super effective. They got a lot of attacks. They're 15 points each, so they're not super expensive. And as a group, they get even better. And you can take them in hordes of 20 or something like 30 maybe. They can be super effective in large numbers, supported by a Primus giving them +1 to attack, to a Patriarch giving +1 to attack. And the Patriarch, if they're by there, they're fearless if they're by a Patriarch, within 6 inches of a Patriarch. So suddenly now they don't even have to worry about the losses that they end up taking in return. So if you start throwing them in there, they're going to be effective. But to support them, you need to have some other units. So I'm a big fan of the Cult Demon Russ. I think he's super effective. I mean, it's our best long-range shooting. Throw a las cannon on there, throw some heavy flamers on there, throw a battle cannon, whatever you want to do, however you want to work it out that way. They're going to be super effective at providing some long-range attacks that the rest of the army doesn't really have the ability to do so. Then you can throw in, I like the Rock Grinder. I really like the Rock Grinder because you throw it in there with a cache of demo charges and an Acolyte squad inside, and they shoot up the board. They can start throwing these Acolyte, it's like D6, strength 8, AP -3 hits with the cache of demo charges. Put a clearance incinerator in there, it's a 12-inch heavy flamer. Super effective. And then when they get close combat, they're not scrubs when it comes to that. They've got that the blade in the front there, giving them additional attacks on the charge, giving you some AP on those attacks, giving you they're not bad in combat, so they're really great at running up there, and you can even use them as to soak up Overwatch if you don't manage to get off the mass hypnosis. You run that thing into them, and getting them in combat is pretty decent as a Rock Grinder, but then you have a squad of 20 Genestealers that didn't have to take Overwatch because he's locked in there. They can come in and start cleaning up the act. So I'm really a big fan of using Rock Grinders, and then I like to sit squads of Neophytes on objectives. Acolytes are fun to sit on objectives because they can hide easier. There's a 5-man squad. You can just hide them back there sitting on an objective. If your opponent gets too close, they're not slouches when it comes to combat either. They've got rending claws as well. They've got cult knives. So they've got a bunch of attacks. Hitting on 3s, pretty decent. The HQs, I don't think there's a single bad HQ in our list. The Patriarch is a Brood Lord, but he buffs buffs pure strain Genestealers really well in combat, and he's really good in combat, like a Brood Lord. I really like the Magus. He's a cheap psyker who has access to powers to either buff your opponent, buff your own army's ability to fight, or take away your opponent's ability to fight, which is always really nice. Not getting overwatched is wonderful. So that mass hypnosis is a really great power to give your Magus, because you can drop them in there with on their own even when you're doing the cult ambush. So even if you have to go 12 inches away, as long as you're not rolling a 1 for them, you're probably going to be able to get them where you need to, so that they're within 18 inches to stop the overwatch from happening. So I think those and then you've got the Primus, who's actually not a slouch in combat. He's got a bone sword. He's got a bunch of attacks hitting on 2s. He's got a needle pistol for shooting, which is great because I mean it's a pistol, so you're in combat. That's where you want to be with. That's where you want to be with the majority of this army. And he gives all of those bonuses to fighting in there, to getting off the charge because of Cult Ambush, which is, like I said, controlling Cult Ambush is going to be key to doing well with this army. So Primuses are going to be key to getting your key units into combat. So use him with a squad of Aberrants, use him with a squad of Pure Strains, and you'll be pretty happy to get that off. Yeah, so that's the key to doing well with this army is try to enhance your abilities to utilize Cult Ambush. We have another stratagem that allows us to return to the shadows. I haven't had as much success with that because games go quicker and you can't return to shadows the same time that you've arrived. But if you really flub up an attack, if you really flub up a Cult Ambush with a unit and they're stuck in your back line, you know, return them to shadows, and then a turn later they get to come back in. So you just got to be, you know, more than 9 inches away, and if you're all the way in your back end, why not? You know, it's the same thing as we had in 7th edition, except you have to spend a CP now to use it, which is, I mean, the way that the game goes. Most of the things that you could do in 7th edition because of whatever are now CP inducing. So that's kind of the key, is control Cult Ambush. If you can control Cult Ambush, if you can get off good Cult Ambushes, if you can get your units into combat, into close combat, you're going to do well. You know, Genestealers in close combat do well against pretty much anything. You know, pure strains in there. The Patriarch in close combat does well against anything. Aberrants are beasts in close combat. You got a 6-man squad with power hammers now. Suddenly, with a Primus there, they're hitting on 3s because they're usually hitting on 3s. Power hammers -1. Primus gives them +1. Power hammers are hitting on 3s. It's basically they're just thunder hammers. Is what you're doing. And then you can do power picks, which is strength user, but you're hitting on 2s now with that Primus there. So they're really great at taking out infantry because they're doing D3 damage, strength user, AP -2 or 3 or something like that. They're great at taking out infantry. And then the power hammers are really great at taking out heavy targets. So taking on, you know, even Knight Titans and tanks of all sorts. They're really good at doing that. So if you can get them in there with a Primus, I really like utilizing the Aberrants. They dropped their prices pretty considerably because it was essentially the expense of putting power hammers and power picks on them made it hard to utilize them well in the beginning part of 8th edition. But once Chapter Approved came out and dropped those prices on them, I love them. I love using them. So I would look into using them. But yeah, Aberrants and Pure Strains, if you can get them into combat, you're going to do well. Utilize the powers of your HQs to get them there. Utilize the power of the HQs to make them even more effective once they are there. And that's going to be your game plan. That's what you got to do. Everything else is going to be to support them. So you've got long range support from the Cult Numerous, some extra long range support from the Armored Sentinels. You've got a bunch of other units that you can just sit on objectives to help, so that your attention can be on getting in those close combats and taking out your army without having to worry about getting back on objectives back in your end zone. That's what you got to do, and that's how you do well, and that's what you're going to do well, is utilizing those techniques there. So what do you do if you see them across the table? Because I have a bunch of friends who have faced off against them, and it's surprising. You know, you think an index army, you don't really think that you're going to have a lot to worry about, but they're super effective. If I roll well with my Cult Ambush, they're really hard to handle. And what it's going to come down to at that point to handle it well is prepare yourself for first turn assaults from a bajillion Genestealers right up in your grill. You know, so when you're deploying, assume that I'm going to roll 6s for all of my Pure Strains, or assume I'm going to roll 6s for all of my Aberrants. Assume I'm going to roll 6s for whatever it is that I'm trying to get in. Assume that, you know. Assume that I'm going to drop my Magus down there and he is going to mass hypnosis you. It's a power 7, but assume that that's going to happen. Assume my Patriarch is going to give my Pure Strains +1 attack, +1 strength. With that assumption, you can prepare yourself for those attacks. And if you prepare yourself for those attacks, you have the ability to ward off the rest of the army, you know? Because once I'm dropped in, once I'm on the table, if I'm not actively engaged in the act of killing you in close combat, I'm really easy to kill off the board. I'm really easy to shoot off the board because pure strains go down real fast with those 5-up impulse. You know, you're looking at only making a third of your saves for the shots that you put into them, the wounds that you put into them. And at toughness 4, most of the time, most of your stuff is going to be wounding on 4s or 3s anyway. So put a whole bunch of bolter fire into them and watch them just fall apart. You know, that's what you need to do, is you need to try to keep me from getting into combat as much as possible. But assume that I'm going to get those 6s. So deploy defensively. Sit yourself in a corner and just onion yourself out. I've talked about this when I was talking about deploying how to deploy it effectively and how to avoid alpha strike. This is essentially just one of the crazier alpha strikes, one of the less predictable alpha strikes. But deploy yourself in such a way that you assume you're going to be alpha struck by them. So onion it up so that you've got layer upon layer of chaff between you and between any place that I can place my units, because I still have to place, even if I roll a 6, more than 9 inches away. So if I can't place more than 9 inches away and I don't have a clear path to get to you, I'm not going to be able to do it. So if you put it in an onion with different levels, different layers that they get stuck in, that they can't get more, they can't keep more than 1 inch away from when they're coming in there. I mean, you know, great, you lose a squad of infantrymen to a 15-man pure strain squad, and the next turn you just wail into them with your shooting and they're dead. You know, aberrants, same thing. You know, they get locked into combat with, you know, a fire warrior squad, and then your Yavara comes in and just flames them dead. The key is to make sure that you keep your opponent at arm's length long enough that you can shoot them. So deploy yourself defensively, and it may seem counterintuitive because your opponent's going to be deploying and they're going to be like, I put this in cult ambush, 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 and now I'm going to place these, you know, other units that are very killable first turn out there on the board. And they're probably going to spread them out. They're not going to be keeping them castled in because they're alpha striking you. And if you're going to alpha strike them, they're still going to have the option, even if they're going second, of coming in there. The Genestealer Cult play as one of the more aggressive armies out there, because if your cult ambush doesn't do well, you're going to struggle. So even if you place yourself defensively, it's not much going to help if you can't get off those cult ambushes. But if your cult ambush goes well, you're going to be golden. So you, as the opponent to Genestealer Cult, need to try to make it so that their cult ambush can't be as effective as they want it to be. So put the chaff between them and the units that they want to kill. You know, make sure that they're not able to string combats along. So if they get in combat with if they get into combat with that infantry squad and they wipe them, make sure that they can't then consolidate into combat with another infantry squad, because they will take close combat attacks from an infantry squad any day over getting shot to death by basilisks, you know? And they're going to do that all day long, is just keep climbing into you bit by bit as they get closer and closer. So you want to have it so that your opponents are spread out and they don't have to worry about getting you want to have it so that they can't just string attacks along. And if you manage to do that, if you have your essentially onion of defense going on with all of your chaff in the front there, you're going to have the option to shoot them off the board once they come in from cult ambush. So even if they roll 6s, they can't get engaged with your important units off the bat, and at that point, you just shoot them off the board. You know, that's what it comes down to. And so if you can do all you can with your deployment to mitigate their ability to engage you like that, you're going to do better. The way that you also have to be careful, though, because sometimes if you have that onion and it becomes very obvious what's going on there, your opponent can hold their alpha strike until turn 2. You know, so turn 1 they just use all of that extra army, you know, shooting support that they had on the rest of the board there to clear off that chaff. So suddenly now you've got some neophytes that are coming in to wipe out your chaff. You've got the, you know, Leaving Rust that's just throwing 2 shots, because they got ground in advance too, so they got 2 battle cannon shots down the table, just clearing out all your chaff. And suddenly turn 2, your a little bit open, and then they drop in 15 Genestealers that charge up into your face. So make sure that you're fully aware of the lanes of attack, and don't disengage from your safety bubble until they've committed their units for Cult Ambush. So even if you have to wait till turn 3 for them to drop them down, because if they're still in Cult Ambush after turn 3, they're dead. It's just like any other reserves. So even if you have to wait till turn 3 before you start moving out, you can heave down some long-range shooting down there. You can do whatever you can from that little safety bubble, but don't leave it. Don't be tempted to come out and try to be like, oh, I'm totally going to be able to wipe them off the board, because they've got really high leadership. So if you leave anybody on that table, any in that squad, they're going to do well. You know, the leaders are like leadership 7 or 8. They're like Space Marines, because they're just fanatic cults. You know, and they've got other HQs like the banner that allows them to be fearless and things like that. So you're not going to, unless you can fully wipe them off the board, they're probably going to stick around. And as long as one guy's there, he's going to go hide in the corner where you can't see him, and allow the Cult Ambush to come in and get you. So I know it's super tempting to try to go out there and wipe that one Leman Russ and that one Rock Grinder and that one Armored Sentinel off the table, but if your opponent can get off those charges in the Cult Ambush, you're in trouble. So act defensively, deploy defensively, assume that your opponent's going to get all 6s in the Cult Ambush, assume that they're going to get off all those psychic powers, and assume that they're going to that they're going to get in combat with you, and do all you can to try to ameliorate that, and be patient. So don't jump out of your defensive, because if you deploy in that defensive position and then turn 1 you go first and you just flood out to try to kill them off the table, you're going to be in trouble, because then those Cult Ambushes are going to drop in, and they're going to have those avenues to get into you. Like I said, even if you have just an avenue for me to walk through, I mean, are you going to be able to keep me? The Pure Strains have the ability to move 14 inches after being placed 9 inches away from you, and still charge, because they have the ability to advance and charge, which is pretty brutal. So, be careful. It's hard to try to deploy defensively enough that Pure Strains can't get at you. I know that, but you need to. That's the only way that you're going to survive those attacks, or you can hope that they roll poorly, and at that point you're placing the how well this game is going to go off of a few dice rolls, which, I mean, that's essentially what the game does. But as a good general, you need to have a game plan that's not dependent upon your opponent rolling poorly, because if you're dependent upon your opponent rolling poorly and they roll hot, you're going to lose, plain and simple. So but you can make decisions and deployments and effective strategies to mitigate your opponent rolling well in those very specific states. So if you keep it so that those Cult Ambushes, even if you roll 6s, can't get at your important units, you're going to do well. So yes, deploy defensively, have some patience, and make sure that you don't make any rash decisions that are going to leave you exposed to the enemy, and you should be able to do well against the Genestealer Cult. Nothing guaranteed again, because like I said, they could come down, just spend 2 turns clearing away your chaff, so that once those Genestealers finally come in, they've got an open lane to just charge into your Leman Russes, charge into your Wherevers, and cancel out your ability to Overwatch, and then just arrive full strength and just wreck your day. So yeah, Genestealer Cults, man, they are one of the most underrated forces I think out there right now. When they get their Codex, I think they're going to be super brutal. I really think they're going to be super brutal. I think there's a bunch of armies that are waiting for Codexes that are going to be super brutal. Orcs, I think, are going to be super brutal. Tau, I think, are going to be super brutal. Necrons are going to be super brutal. There's a bunch of other ones that I think are going to do much better than they currently do. But I think those armies in particular, the Orcs, the Necrons, the Tau, and the Genestealer Cult, are going to be super effective once they get their Codexes, get a couple stratagems under their belt. They're going to be really effective. So those are just my thoughts. What have been your thoughts? Have you guys had any either success stories or failure stories when it comes to the Genestealer Cult? How do you play them? How have you played against them? What are your thoughts, just knowing about it? General thoughts? You know, a lot of people talk about mixing them with Astra Militarum or Tyranids, and I think that can be super effective. You know, having a detachment, you know, having a what's the elite one? The Vanguard detachment of a bunch of pure strain Genestealers with some Primuses to help them get into combat. I think that could be super effective. I think it would be super effective as an additional, because, I mean, especially with Astra Militarum, you lose regimental bonuses. That's why I think in the Codex we're going to get some I think there'll be some cool regimental bonuses for Brood Brothers, which I think would be really great. But you lose regimental bonuses because everything has to become Brood Brothers. But what Astra Militarum really lack is strong assault. And the Genestealer Cult brings strong assault in spades. So just run them up there, and as an effective use, you have your Astra Militarum throwing in a bunch of artillery to shoot from long range, and then you've got a bunch of pure strain Genestealers or Aberrants running in there as awesome assault to really enhance your army's ability to strike fast. I think that's the strongest ally matrix that you can do, because a lot of what the Genestealer Cult do, the Tyranids can do as well. You've got lictors that can jump down on you from unexpectedly. They also do assault very well. That's what Tyranids do the best as well. So I think that the biggest benefit for allies is definitely with Astra Militarum, because of the synergy that it works there with strong shooting from Astra Militarum and strong assault from the Genestealer Cult. So that's just something that keep in mind. I think that's a good way that you could play them together and play them well. But I think they're still super effective as a standalone army. I think they're going to be even stronger once they get a Codex. So let me know what your experience has been with them. Has it been just small detachments with Astra Militarum armies, basically, or has it been as a pure standalone Genestealer Cult army? Because we have the ability to control table boards. Like, we've got really cheap troop units that can be objective secured with some decent options for weapons. We've got 8 great HQs, we've got great assault units, and we've got some shooty defense from a distance with Leading Russes and the Cult Sentinels and stuff like that. But that's still obviously our weakest point. But if you get off really good Cult ambushes, you don't care. So let me know what your experience has been, what you're most worried about when you see them, and keep that conversation going down below. Really, really appreciate that. So I hope you guys have all enjoyed this. I certainly have. I have been Phil the Glacial Geek as always. And until next time, have fun.